We now move into that part. We welcome questions from the floor. I have a few questions on Twitter here, which I will ask this time, which I forgot to do last time. Maybe if I could just start with each of the panelists in turn, and then if you have a question, please just sort of raise your hand, and ask each of you, how big do you think the trend that you've talked about could become? And should successful companies today see it as a threat or an opportunity? So maybe in the order of that you spoke, Paul.
Okay, well, you know, what I'm advocating in terms of always-on broadband video communications being ubiquitous is a multi-trillion-dollar change that is of unimaginable size. And the only reason, in my opinion, why the information and communication technology companies don't seize it is because they're making so much money out of what they're currently doing. They just can't be bothered to invest in this, which is just depressing, but I think it's true.
So in terms of scale, I mean, we are a nation of loyalty lovers. I challenge anyone not to have a Nectar card, a Club card, or a Boots Advantage card in their purse, wallet, or handbag right now. If not, you're very clever because you've managed to get away from the tracking that goes on. But I think from our perspective, we see the opportunity is huge. I think the challenge becomes how partner organisations position this within their organisation. It sits somewhere between corporate social responsibility and marketing. And as I think we all know in this room, the marketeers have the budgets and the corporate social responsibility guys have the conscience. And sometimes never the twain shall meet. So that's one of the big challenges that big organisations face in terms of reaching our platform. But as a nation of loyalty lovers, I think the opportunity is huge.
Rob, sorry, before you go on, Mike. Rob, could you just explain the mechanism? So when you collect the recycling, and then what happens after that?
So yes, great question. So our programme tracks and monitors your recycling impact. So I think what was alluded to before was that dreadful word that comes out of the Daily Mail. Anyone who reads that, I do apologise, which is the chips in bin. We tend to call it tags, but it's a way of monitoring your recycling performance and behaviour. It's a non-intrusive, low-frequency tag, sits on your bin and just tells us the weight of what you've recycled. We weigh bins on the back of a truck. They're weighed on the way up, they're weighed on the way down over 1,000 times, and the net of that weight is then converted into Recycle Bank points. The actual chip itself, despite what you'll hear written in the popular press, can't tell you what you've eaten, can't tell you what you've done, can't tell you who you're seeing or anything else other than the fact that there's this amount of weight in that bin. So it's very non-intrusive and non-personally identifiable information as well. And it's that personal identification of impact that has a great impact when you bring that sort of community collective together, which is where we've seen these big increases in recycling rates in our boroughs in the UK over the last couple of years. And
the recycle points then convert into local businesses?
Absolutely. The Recycle Bank points are where our platform then aligns with businesses as well. So earning points is one thing, but any of you who are Nectar, Club card or Boots Advantage card, customers will know that the benefit comes from your personal reward. We work on a local level and a national level with businesses and reward partners to offer incentives. So some of our big partners are players like Marks & Spencer, for example. But we bring together a rewards program that motivates people on a local level. So we know what type of rewards motivate people to change behaviour, and we build programs on a local level that match that. So in some of our existing partners, golf courses and garden centres work really well. If you go to other areas, it's tanning salons and nails. But that's the power of our program. It's flexible to allow that, to give that change, which then is what motivates people to make their behavioural change.
Mike.
Well, sustainable intensification is a concept, as I said, that can apply to all types of farming. If you look at the cropland that we're using to feed the current population, it's about 1.5 billion hectares. Now, we simply don't have another 1.5 billion hectares to grow crops on. So to double production, we've actually got to get more from the current land. Because even if we did find that land, and some people have made estimates that there may be 600 or 700 million hectares to be found, those land use changes that I talked about really make that a completely bad option. So I think for the future, growing more from less. That's a challenge that can go out to organic farmers in just the same way. Yes, they want to grow in an organic system, but the yields that you get in any system, you'll always find very low yields and good yields. And what we want is more of those farmers in any system growing good to high yields.
Shelby, how big, and this is in this country, car sharing is still much more infant than the States, but how big can it be? Can it become?
Sure. Well, I guess I'll comment on two things. One is just setting the context of what the opportunity is, and the second I think is talking about where I think it can go. To start, it can be unclear sort of what car sharing is. What market are you playing in? I think right now, revenues are in the order of $1 billion globally. So it seems like a relatively small market, but I don't think it's not just a car sharing market that we're playing in. We're playing in transportation, mobility. It's how people get around. It's not car rental. Car rental is an attractive market of tens of billions of dollars. But you think about mobility, and people spend hundreds of billions of dollars every year on mobility. And again, just to sort of put things in perspective, I know the numbers in the United States a little better, so I'll use those. But there's 260 million cars on the road in the United States. Zipcar is the global leader in car sharing, and it has about 10,000 cars. With a very, very small penetration rate, we can have an absolutely enormous fleet of vehicles that dwarfs the size of the current industry. And with strong penetration rates, as we can show the growth of this over time, can have just a dramatic impact and can literally lead to an industry that's hundreds of billions of dollars every year. If you think a little bit more globally about this, there's currently about a billion cars on the road, and if trends stay the same, we'll be hitting 2 billion cars in the within, I believe it's 25 years. And so that would be catastrophic to the environment in our communities. You just simply can't fit that many more cars on the road. And the majority of that growth would be in a lot of the developing world. So if you think about an emerging middle class in India and China, what happens when they have the disposable income to purchase a car, and you have Tata making the Nano, which is a brand new car for $2,000. What's going to happen? How are those consumer behaviors going to develop, and are they going to buy a billion cars? I think that'd be catastrophic for everybody if that happened. And so, what we're hopeful about is that the developing world may leapfrog sort of that traditional model of car ownership, similar to how the developing world, to a large extent, leapfrogged landlines. They went directly to mobile phones, and even among the very poor, mobile phones have a very high penetration rate. So we're hopeful that we can influence and play a part of the developing world's choice to choose smarter methods for transportation that are better for their economy and the environment.
Very good. Now, do we have any questions from the floor? We've got a question at the back. Let's start over there.
Thanks. Yeah, so Ben Kellard from Forum for the Future. I was curious to know that, I guess it's from Shelby, really. By definition, new business models require pitching new ideas to businesses which have often got quite conventional financial structures and ways of understanding a promising business proposition. So have you got any insights, really, on how you sell an unconventional business model to conventional businesses with conventional ways of understanding a value proposition?
Sure. I mean, we tried to get ahead of the conversation. So we went out proactively and spoke with most of the major OEMs. And we had a vision for them on, we helped them understand what was happening. I think a lot of them had heard about Zipcar and car sharing and didn't really understand the trends that well. And so we helped put it in perspective in terms of, this is what's already happening. Here's what's happening in the broader sharing economy. So we talked a little about some of our, Airbnb and some of the things that I mentioned where, look, this isn't just cars. There's sort of a broader conversation that's happening. And I think the first thing we do is help them understand from our perspective, what's happening in the industry and how our consumer behavior is changing. And then we got more specific and tried to help them understand a couple different ways that we could work together to make this actually something that was really good for their business model. So, something that wouldn't have sort of a short-term, any period negative impact in terms of reducing sales, but helping them understand, this is what the upside could be. And I think by getting ahead of the conversation, helping shape it, it helped people view us in a more friendly light. And ultimately, we moved incredibly quickly with GM. It was 4 months from the first meeting to a signed contract and functional prototype. So it was remarkable speed for a big company to work through. But we had buy-in all the way up to the senior leadership. The vice chairman of General Motors is the sponsor of the project. So by helping companies see how something could be in its own interest, I think it drove a lot of interest and support within the organization.
Thank you. John.
Is this on? Hello? John Hatton from Alpheon Energy. I was wondering, a question to anyone in the panel, how some of these solutions will overcome local cultural and regional differences. For example, in some areas of the world where the rule of law isn't enforced as much, or in others where there are particular cultural sensitivities, and if the panel has considered how the solutions will evolve to meet those challenges.
I don't mind going first, just kind of, I love studying politics my whole life, and I think sustainability is a problem that the government can't fix. That's actually what sustainability means. When the government can't fix a serious problem, we call it sustainability. So we're all, like business people, gathered together in a room in London talking about how we're going to deal with climate change or whatever. And I'm encouraged that where business can profitably and effectively act to, for example, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which is my area of expertise, then it will be able to find a way to work with the local communities in our common interest.
I guess the slogan.
I'll go ahead and answer that as well. So I think that there are sort of two components to it. One is structural. We have to have an insurance policy that covers the reservation. And one thing that we do right now is we screen driving records and only approve safe drivers. So we'd have to consider those things on a regional basis. What do we need to do to provide the insurance to make it safe? And how can we get drivers' information? And the goal there is actually just to effectively screen drivers. So we may be able to come up with other creative ways to screen out the risky drivers. So that's sort of on the structural side. I think there's also a cultural factor and an adoption factor. How do you get people to try something new? And I would say that there's sort of two responses there. I think one is we'll be able to highlight successes in other areas, and just helping people understand that that this works, and that that people within their community will respect their possessions. And the second thing is that it's pretty easy to get somebody to do something when you're paying them. So that should definitely help consumers who are considering this decide to enroll their cars.
Yeah, I guess I was going to say the old slogan is think global, act local. But I would remind you that we have to put the customer right at the heart of our thinking. And when you're talking about a farmer, they may well be growing the same crop, but they may well be growing it in totally different areas of climate, by different systems. And the resources that they have available to them will be very different. So actually, we have to have the ability to tailor solutions for individual farmers. And when we're talking about advanced concepts like resource use efficiency, and that has got to be delivered in an individual farmer's field, actually by them. And so how we transfer that knowledge to them, how we get the technologies to them, will differ from place to place. And it's much more difficult in some parts of the world. And Africa in particular, which was that flat line on the yield graph since 1960s, that's the place where food security and the challenge is really going to be felt most seriously. because sub-Saharan Africa, on the current estimates, trebles its population this century. And without a transformation of their agriculture, which needs all of those investments I talked about, that's going to be a really difficult challenge.
Rob. And I think I'd mirror sort of some of the comments that have already been made. It's about how the end member is understood and motivated. So as an example, I'll give you, we launched here in the UK in June 2009 in the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead, which obviously I'm not sure if the Queen's a member or not, but it's a nice borough, very affluent, and the motivation there on an economic level, as I mentioned before, is more towards golf clubs, garden centres. And what we have is a model that allows us to pull those levers, whether it's economic, social or informational, accordingly. Our second borough we launched was in the northwest, get that right, it's the northwest, Runcorn and Widnes, which has some of the highest levels of deprivation within that borough. Incredible, that you sort of see these levels, but those people are motivated in different ways, slightly more economically than our members in Windsor and Maidenhead. They tend to sort of, everybody likes the rewards, but they move more towards the social and informational side. But it's finding those levers and finding it on a local level, because even within a country like the UK, you've got the, side by side, you've got different people motivated by different things, and that's where our programme can move around and flex accordingly.
Got any other questions from the floor? We have one down here. Sue, can we get a mic? There we are.
Hi, Sandy Smith from P International. I'm just noticing, I don't think this is quite radical in terms of radical efficiency, in terms of what we're necessarily talking about. I mean, one aspect in terms of people in the northwest or people in the boroughs getting points to reduce their waste, what do they go and do? Go and spend it in Marks and Spencer's, doing more consumption. Have we really grasped radical efficiency here, or are we just tinkering around the sides?
Okay, very good question. How are we talking about radical efficiency, or is this tinkering?
I'd like to maybe just come back on the question of consumerism, because I think that's an interesting point that's raised. There is an assumption that our model drives consumerism and therefore drives greater levels of waste. Well, every indication we have from our UK boroughs with DEFRA data, which is independently audited and brought together, shows us that recycling rates are up and waste to landfill is down. And there's a very clear relationship between those two. So what we're finding is actually there's more of a growing trend in the retail sector, and people are moving more towards programs like ours to help them out when gas prices, electricity prices, fuel prices, etc. are on the increase. Programs like ours are helping them to maintain sort of a balance because of disposal income falling. In terms of radical, I think from our perspective, what we're doing right now is about bringing everybody onto the same footing. I think where it becomes more radical is when you start to use techniques like gamification to motivate people, and you really do harness the power of the social web. That, I think, is where we start to get more radical, but it's about a firm footing within what we are right now before we move up another step.
Paul?
Well, I mean, the society is entirely designed, built around transport. People are moving themselves at the most ridiculous rate constantly all over the world. And India and China and all these emerging economies are about to build infinity roads and airports. We've got a kind of last-ditched opportunity to massively reduce the kind of transport we do here. And I put this to the chief executive of Cisco Systems, John Chambers. I said, it's my opinion that we can remove 50% of human transport with this technology. He said, you're wrong, it's 60%. But if even of us are remotely correct, we're talking about gigantic cuts in greenhouse gas emissions, massive increases in quality of life, and the potential to decouple economic growth. I mean, I'm going to come back to that point of newspapers and so many other products and services from physical consumption. It's a highly radical agenda. Broadband, dematerialization, moving the economy from atoms to bytes is the most radical political and sustainability agenda you can imagine.
So, from our end, car sharing is one of the most effective ways to drive a reduction in consumer vehicle miles traveled, period. And Car sharing has done a great job in major urban markets with high with great density and that are very well served by public transit. But what the peer-to-peer model does, what we're doing, is it removes all of the overhead and the capital intensity in order to operate car sharing. And so you can start to move outside of dense urban areas into suburban or even rural areas. And that's actually what we did today at Relay Rides. So we launched nationwide, and now anywhere that you live, regardless of if you're in a suburb or in a small town or a big city, car sharing is now something that's available to you. And so this is something that just could not have happened with traditional car sharing, with the Zipcar business model. They have to maintain really high utilization rates in order to cover their fixed costs. And so they will never put a car into a suburb. And so the only way that you can extend the benefits of car sharing into other areas is by completely changing the business model. But before we launched, renting your vacation rental out or your vacation home out wasn't that crazy of an idea. I mean, people have been doing it for years, but nobody in the world had been renting out cars before 2010. This is a very new thing, and it's very exciting to be a part of and to be taking the benefits of car sharing outside of the areas where it's been constrained up until now.
Talk about radical. Most people in here can see him better than me, and he's in America. I mean, this is big stuff.
Sandy, what do you think? Do you think that is radical or not?
In the two cases, letters to email. Where's the radical resource change on the example that you were saying from the States in terms of the drill? In terms of putting sharing in front of an agenda doesn't mean it suddenly becomes green. My local rental place for a drill is 20 minutes drive, 20 minutes back. If I'm using that drill, it might be better for me to buy the drill and not go and rent it. So I just want us to be careful about how we use this term sharing, and just putting it in front of these initiatives doesn't mean it's radical and doesn't mean the resource is being shared. The house example, in terms of moving from one house to the other house, I can't see that being a radical initiative in terms of sharing vacations, in terms of resource use.
To answer on behalf of Airbnb, they will rent out more hotel or more rooms than the Hilton Hotel Group this year. So if you can imagine that we no longer have to build enormous stock in order for people to stay in them, then it does start to get a more radical use of resources possibly. And I think that's the argument behind the sharing economy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the average car, it's used 8% of the time. It's sitting around 92% of the time. Can you think of any business that has an incredibly valuable asset, the second most valuable asset that it owns, with an 8% utilization rate? I certainly can't. And so, as we make it safe and convenient and socially acceptable to be renting out the things that you own, it's just a way better use of resources. I mean, the carbon footprint of creating a car is a very large portion of the greenhouse gas emissions from operating that vehicle or using that vehicle at all. So, as we can reduce the number of cars on the road, I do think that it is a really meaningful impact and absolutely something that's revolutionary for transportation.
Question down here.
My name is Mark Sumner from Marks & Spencer's. First of all, it's great to be in an auditorium like this, hearing Marks & Spencer's been talked about so much, so thank you very much for that. The question I have is around the consumer. We spend a lot of time talking to our consumers, and we'd love to be able to control where they spend their money and how they spend their money. We've recognised there's a few issues with actually doing that and getting them to change their behaviour. I sat in a consumer panel just before Christmas, and I can guarantee that consumers will think of 15 reasons not to change their behaviour. And, you can spout out all of the fantastic, knowledge about a drill being used for 7 minutes or cars only being used for 80% of their time. Convenience and what they want to do is important. And we showed them some fantastic product, and they said, don't like it, it's the wrong colour. Even though it was a eco product, it's the wrong colour. So the question I have is, how radical can we actually be with these things? And are we going to be too radical if we actually turn around to the consumers and said, you know what, you can't buy that stuff over there. You can't use that stuff over there unless you're going to pay to use it. What you have to be using is the green stuff. How would that model actually work? And well, first question is, would you agree with that sort of approach? But how would you actually get that model to work in your individual areas?
Anyone care to?
I think up until now, we have been forcing consumers to make choices between, economical and green. It wasn't sort of the same thing. You can get, a green organic product, but it's going to cost you twice as much. I think that's a really tough sell. There's an emerging class of consumers that's growing, that's been termed pocketbook environmentalists, and this is people who won't spend more to be green, but if they're given price parity and they're given all else equal, they can either go at the same price, they can go green, or they can go traditional. They're going to go green. And so that's really one thing why I think that Relay Reds is growing, is because we've made the smart choice the environmental choice. We're not forcing you to choose. And the more that you use Relay Reds, the greener it is. So I think by bundling by having a service or a product where you're not forcing people to choose between green and economics, or where the environmental impact is really tied up within the core of the service or product, I think that those can drive real meaningful changes without making the switching barrier too high.
Can I say, first of all, Marks & Spencer was the first ever company to respond to the Carbon Disclosure Project, so it's an honour to be here with you. Second thing I'd say is I'd like to thank a brilliant person called John Alexander, who works at National Trust, and he told me not to call people consumers, and he had to say it 3 times before I finally heard him, and he was looking quite stern. He's like a big guy, but finally I got it. And I call people citizens now, because consumers will do crazy things, but citizens will think about what's in their own interest and the interest of their children. There's kind of like a war on. It's an absolutely catastrophic situation. We're not going to go into the science or insult anyone's intelligence. But things are not funny. Now, almost every time I talk to smart people who I admire about climate change, they say, the solution is Marks & Spencer's. They do the choice editing for you. You can't work it all out. It's too complicated. But Marks & Spencer's are looking after you. They're going to make those decisions for you. You trust Marks & Spencer's. You go there, and they may have edited out the worst things. And if you do that, I think you'll do brilliantly and kind of, forgive me, save the world.
Well, I'm a Marks & Spencer's customer or consumer. Look, there's my tie to prove it, which is probably on there. It's a very boring tie, but actually they don't have the sort of fancy range that I used to have with my giraffes and things on it. So I'd like to see those back. The customer has spoken. If I can say 2 things. Firstly, you have to be able to make doing the right thing easy for people. And I think if that's really where we're getting a lot of mileage in our own thinking for integrated solutions. You're putting together technologies in a way that's very compelling for the farmer because it's easier for them as well as very cost effective for them. Of course, in our industry too, it's a very heavily regulated industry. You can't just do what you want. And I think certainly in Western countries, farmers recognise if they don't do things in the right way, and we are not keeping pesticides out of water, then there'll be increasing regulation and threats to those tools being available at all to the farmers, which will have negative impacts on them. So I think it is carrot and stick. But actually, a lot of it's about making sure that people understand why they have to do the right things or why they have to do things in a particular way.
So I think obviously we mentioned that Recycle Bank and Marks & Spencer are working very closely together, and we thank you for your support over the last few years as we've built our business here in the UK. I think the way that Recycle Bank look upon it, our theory is that people don't wake up one morning and go, I'm going to live green today. That's not the way that people live their lives. Similar to any sort of consumer-based organisation, we've segmented our core customer, the eco-curious mum, to understand how she lives her life, because she's the one who's most interested in eco-change. But it's nudge theory change. It's not making huge, radical, big, hairy-chested gestures with open-toe sandals and big green jumpers. This is about making different changes to her lifestyle throughout her day, primarily driven by motherhood and the fact that she wants to have a better place for her kids. So what we're trying to do is put our platform where that eco-curious mum is. So if she wakes up in the morning, she switches on her iPhone, she's on Recycle Bank, hey, let's make sure there's something posted on the wall early in the morning. We might be tweeting, we might be out on Flickr or Pinterest or YouTube. We might be sending her a tip or a pledge where she can earn points. And that's very much what our model's about, is trying to create that nudge theory to move people along the dial, as opposed to making massive radical changes. Some people will make those massive radical changes, but we believe that the vast majority of people are motivated by nudge theory, and it's that nudge theory which has been successful for us so far.
Okay, well, I just want to turn to Twitter now, because we're talking about how we sort of manage things within the confines of consumer demand, but there are two questions which kind of work together. One is saying, Syngenta leading the way with tailored solutions, should we manage yield or demand better? And then the other one is, why do we need to improve radical efficiency in food production? We do need to improve radical efficiency in food production, but how about reducing obesity rates? Are we really just going to keep on going as we are? So I guess people are starting to ask this question, if we're always pandering to people in the market, can we actually deliver the radical solutions that you are wondering whether you're seeing here, if we're always operating within the confines of the consumer being right and the market? What do you guys think?
Well, I mean, if I can just take the food-related topics, we've got 7 billion people, and a lot of people say the world food supply is broken. Now, this is, of course, a ridiculous thing to say, but it's not perfect. We've got about 1 billion people who go to bed hungry every day, and another 1 billion people who are probably short of important micronutrients, which really is damaging their health. But we've also got this other, perhaps as many as 1 billion people, who are overeating and creating all sorts of problems with metabolic diseases. So clearly there's an issue. On the food supply side, it's not sufficient to say, well, we'll stop all these fat British and American people eating too much, and then everyone will have the same amount of food. Actually, it's about having that food available and affordable in the places where people need to eat it, and educating people that, you know, if they are becoming obese, they've only got themselves to blame for this, not anybody else, because you are completely in control about what goes into your mouth and how much exercise you do to get rid of those excess calories. That's my view. It's not Syngenta's view.
Listen at night, quietly in the middle of the night, and you can just, if you're in a populated area, you can hear the consumer demand. You can hear the consumers demanding all these things. They're thought, what a load of rubbish. There's no consumer demand. I've never heard of anything more stupid in my life. And what happens is entrepreneurs develop products and services, and then they sell them to people with like TV adverts and stuff like that. But what is important is how we have a taxation system, actually. And the great Eckhart Vincent, my videophone teacher, also happened to have invented the concept of value-extracted tax. He said you absolutely should not tax value added. That's taxing employment, that's taxing people. That's why we've got so much unemployment. You should tax raw materials, value extracted tax. If you do that, you shift the economy away from excessive consumption, and you also move the entrepreneurs and the businesses towards delivering people low carbon, low environmental impact products and services. And believe me, the entrepreneurs of the world can deliver and sell us anything.
Question over there, Caroline.
Caroline McCarthy-Stout from Kingfisher. I'm actually working with business in the community on a project called Visioning the Future, Transforming Business. One of the questions I've got is around really engagement of business leaders. There's still only a handful of business leaders that really, and I applaud talking to you talking about this subject tonight, but there is only a handful of business leaders that are really have really got this. And it's, how do we really make that shift from, doing less bad incremental change to real transformational change that we're talking about here? Because, clearly, unless we can really engage the business leaders and get business leaders talking to business leaders, we're not going to make that shift quick enough to really sort of change things.
Anyone want to talk about leadership in this context?
Well, I think the World Economic Forum projects, I think, are a good model for this. And certainly our chief executive has got together and actually has really supported our company being involved in a lot of knowledge sharing projects as part of the World Economic Forum activities. The pictures that I showed on Tanzania are part of our activities in the Corridor Development Project, where different companies are sharing their knowledge to benefit the production of sustainable supply chains. But I think the key thing, how do you wake people up to the fact that these are real issues? I think when you start to see in countries where things like water are becoming very difficult in terms of meeting both demand for urban populations and agriculture, then you start to see much more innovative ways of using things efficiently. So perhaps the leaders in drip irrigation are coming from countries like India and Israel, where water's a bigger issue than it is for us here today. And I think in the future, the same ideas are going to have to be coming in around things like phosphate, where, some people have got scare stories about phosphate, saying, we're at peak phosphate now. Well, we're not. We've got 500 years supply. But if I said we've only got 500 years supply, that's actually a better way of looking at it, because that is an irreplaceable nutrient, and we've absolutely got to start using it more efficiently and actually recycling it so that we're capturing the value from it and using it several times.
Very quick, because on the issue of scarcity, we are out of time, actually. We're eating into roundtable time.
Very briefly, there is a political design problem with the world. Nation states are completely outgunned in significance by global corporations. You speak from a strong place. Ian Cheshire is our kind of national champion. Paul Polman, the chief executive of Unilever, said, this is what I'm doing on sustainability, and if my shareholders don't like it, maybe they're the wrong shareholders. And he was made chair of the World Economic Forum's leadership program on sustainability. The political historians of 2100 would dream of being here now, and any chief executive or chair of board that doesn't take advantage of this unique opportunity to be written in the history books is a fool.
Okay, Paul, thank you very much. Well, listen, guys, we must wrap up now. It's been a really interesting and quite challenging evening, and I think the point over here is well made. How radical are some of these things? Personally, I think there is, particularly in the collaborative consumption world, there is something that makes commercial sense and is radical at the same time. Paul, I think your solution is brilliant, but we need to get fibre optics into households, and both of these two guys here have also provided, I think, a glimpse into different ways that things could be done. But listen, thank you very much to everybody for your contributions, and look forward to seeing you next month, where we move to a more social agenda, the return of social. Thank you to our panel. Thank you, Shelby. Thank you to all. Good.